Let me start by thanking the Project for the opportunity to join this consultation and reflect on some of these indicators. I have to say, I'm really sorry that we were not all able to sit together to actually engage in back and forth discussion. But I send best wishes to all of you, your colleagues, and your loved ones as we all struggle to come through this crisis. So I was asked to reflect on construct 4.2, which is a new construct. The EPMM phase 2 formulation was the presence of an RMC indicator as a right in the National Health Plan. And the proposed construct for measurement is an indicator verifying that the national plan includes a right to RMC. The construct really has two basic ideas in it. One is respectful maternity care, and the other one is this notion of as of right, or a right to respectful maternity care. So I'm understanding the underlying construct that we're trying to measure to be a rights-based dynamic, that is a relationship of obligation and entitlement between the duty bearer and the rights holder that generates a positive, dignified, respectful birthing experience. So in this case, the duty bearer is the health system or health providers, and the rights holder are women, pregnant women, women going through pregnancy and childbirth. So the underlying construct is actually a rights-based dynamic. As written, this indicator should actually be relatively simple to measure. It's the verification that the National Health Plan has a statement of the right to RMC. One wrinkle comes with the words respectful maternity care. So the question arises, are we looking specifically for these words, right to respectful maternity care? Or are we really looking for the substance of the RMC domains, the typology of different issues that, that actually underlie the violation of a right to respectful maternity care? Things like consent or privacy or dignity. So the notion of respectful care is respectful maternity care, or RMC, is a relatively new, evolving concept that can and probably should be somewhat different in different places. So one caveat here, or one question here, is, are we looking for these specific words or multiple rights that would underlie RMC? To my knowledge, there is no current comprehensive compendium across countries of RMC or RMC related policies. So this would need to be measured, but the measurement is really, as I understand it, just a verification of this statement in the National Health Plan. When we look at this indicator, though, it really has several assumptions built in. It assumes that the one-time statement of the right to RMC contained in a multi-year national health plan will be indicative of, one, that the right exists in that country to start with, two, that the government intends and acts on the implementation of that right, and three, that the right itself is actually exercised and enjoyed. So there is this assumption that you are capturing all of these things by stating the right in the National Health Plan. So the first is really this question of whether the National Health Plan is the correct place to verify even the existence of the right in any given country. So we need to be clear that national health plans do not by themselves actually create enforceable formal rights. It's legislation that creates formal rights. A national health plan might be one step toward the implementation of that right, but the right itself in law is not created in a policy document. It's created by a law. Now, human rights norms, international human rights norms, have been interpreted to include RMC as a right. And many countries, of course, do include international human rights laws in their international human rights norms are incorporated into their law. But it usually does take national legislation to formally operationalize a right. So a national health plan is really more accurately a statement of government intent than a document creating a right. So, so we shouldn't be misled that this indicator would actually prove the existence or not of a right. So then the second question is whether the statement of a right to RMC in the National Health Plan, whether that kind of statement actually does correlate with government actions that are needed to implement a right to RMC. So clearly the indicator assumes that such a statement in the National Health Policy is relevant to the existence and the exercise of the right. But all of our experience with human rights in the maternal health realm and in many other realms of human rights really indicates that a policy statement alone, a policy statement that endorses a right, is certainly not enough to implement that right. I mean, the human right to survive pregnancy and childbirth has been recognized for many years in international human rights law, but it really was not until 2012 that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights actually had a group develop, and it endorsed this technical guidance on the application of a rights-based approach to the implementation of policies and programs to reduce preventable maternal mortality and morbidity. In other words, just declaring a rights-based approach was not enough. It required the High Commissioner to produce a whole technical guidance document on how to implement that and make the right real. So this is certainly an indication that the statement of the right alone is not enough to ensure or even correlate with whether the government is doing the necessary things to ensure enjoyment of that right. And indeed, just a couple of years ago in 2019, last year, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women wrote a report documenting obstetric violence, as the term that she used, certainly the non-respect of a right to RMC, as a widespread phenomenon in many countries, despite actually having these norms of basically respectful maternity care, and certainly despite their adoption of human rights standards, the Special Rapporteur has indicated widespread violation of such a right. So this begins to indicate that the right in a policy standing alone may not be the best way to capture whether or not the right is being implemented and enjoyed. when WHO developed its guidelines on intrapartum care for a positive birth experience, the first recommendation is the implementation of respectful maternity care. And for that purpose, it commissioned systematic reviews of the quantitative literature and the qualitative literature. And while these reviews were deemed enough to support a WHO recommendation that health providers should provide respectful maternity care for a positive birth experience, it is notable that none of the studies that these evidence syntheses looked at, none of those studies just looked at the statement of a policy alone. When the first paper by Sue Down et al. Looked at the effectiveness of respectful care policies, all of the studies they looked at we're talking about policies and interventions at the facility level. So to my knowledge, there is no study, no evidence of this kind that simply having a statement of the right to respectful maternity care in a national health policy by itself correlates with the actual establishment of a rights-based dynamic that generates respectful maternity care. So the relevance of the indicator is not assured in terms of its interpretability and its usefulness. There is the challenge that most national health plans are multi-year plans. So what this indicator is essentially doing is verifying at one time whether or not this statement, yes or no, does a right to RMC exist in the national health plan? Well, in that situation, the indicator would not actually vary over the period of the health plan, even if government action to implement such a right to RMC got dramatically better or dramatically worsened. Indeed, the indicator, the verification of a right in the national health plan, would not vary even if violations of that right dramatically improved or dramatically worsened. So if what we're interested in is the actual existence of the dynamic of obligation and entitlement that generates enjoyment of RMC, then I'm not sure that this one-time yes-no indicator in the national plan will capture any notion of progress over time. Then on the question we could call harmonization of how this particular indicator would fit with other indicators, I would say that the statement or endorsement of the right to RMC in a national health plan may be in most countries a necessary element, but far from a sufficient element to generate the set of conditions that are needed for the fulfillment of a right. So it's not that this is unnecessary, but it's far from sufficient. There need to be many other things happening to even begin to implement and that right. Then the question arises whether this indicator standing alone actually could do harm. And at one level, it does risk what we might call rights washing, mistreatment. That is, mistreatment can be going on in the country, done by the government, done in government health services, and putting the government then putting just a acknowledgement of a right to RMC in a health plan. If you're looking at nothing else but that, and you give it a yes, Are you creating the false impression that the government is actually acting in any way to guarantee a right to respectful maternity care? And that raises the deeper, harder question of what is the right point to measure along the whole continuum of actions that are needed to go from a law, a right to RMC in law, to policy, perhaps the national policy, to practice, all the things that are needed at all levels of the health system to ensure the conditions for enjoyment of the right to RMC. Along all of the things that are needed, what is the right point to measure? And is statement in the national policy that point? I think it may be so insensitive to change over the time of a national health policy that I'm not sure it will actually capture anything of what we really want to see a government do to ensure progressively the realization of this right. Thanks.